afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. And welcome to our Trailblazers of the West program, brought to us by Encore Players, Livermore's own community theater group. We're so glad that you're here. My name is Paul Sevilla, Adult Services Librarian at the Livermore Public Library and chairperson of the Livermore Reads Together community-wide reading program. It's a pleasure to have you with us as we celebrate the remarkable pioneers who helped shape the American West. Individuals whose courage, resilience, and determination echo the spirit of the main character in this year's featured book, Silver Lies, by local author Anne Parker. It's a Western mystery novel that takes place in a real pioneer mining town in 1870s in Colorado. So if you like Westerns, if you like mysteries, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Silver Lies. So before we begin, I'd like to ask that you please silence your cell phones and give our presenters your full attention. Every performer you see today is a volunteer from our community, generously sharing their time and talent. I'd also like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of you in the audience. Your support and enthusiasm make programs like this possible and truly meaningful. And finally, a special thank you to Donna Blevins from Encore Players for coordinating and directing this wonderful program. Let's settle in, enjoy the performance, and celebrate the stories that continue to shape our sense of the West.
A trailblazer is a pioneer or innovator who creates a new path, idea, or field, leading the way for others to follow, often breaking barriers or challenging the status quo. They are leaders who leave a legacy for future generations to build upon. Today, March 8th, is Women's History Month Day. So we are featuring more women in our program. However, we are going to start with Mark Twain as presented by Judy Fenton.
Thank you, Donna, because I'm with Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn. And this is how I was able to get the part of Mark Twain. I said, oh, Donna, my middle school in Venice Beach, where I grew up, was called Mark Twain. And also, my maiden name is Finn. So that's how I got to get this part. Mark Twain, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. All modern American literature comes from one book by Mark Twain called Huckleberry Finn. Who wrote this was Ernest Hemingway. He has no mother. His father is a brutal drunkard, and he sleeps in a hog's head. He's Huck Finn, a homeless waiter, a liar and a thief on occasion, and a casual rebel against respectability. But on the day he encounters another fugitive from trouble, a runaway slave named Jim, he also finds for the first time in his life love, acceptance, and a sense of responsibility. And it is in the exciting and moving story of these two outcasts fleeing down the Mississippi on a raft that a wonderful transformation occurs. The boy nobody wants becomes a courageous human being with a sense of his own destiny. Rich in color, humor, and adventures of frontier experience of the Mississippi. This great novel vividly recreates the world, the people, and the language that Mark Twain knew and loved from his own years on the riverboats. Thank you.
I'm Kelsey Tressimer. I'm presenting on Annie Oakley. My tie to Annie Oakley is that when I was 7 years old, the first lead role I was ever cast in was a non-musical version of Kissy Kate. And I enjoyed that so much, and it really cemented my hobby and passion for theater for a very long time. Annie Oakley, born Phoebe Ann Mosey on August 18, 1860, was an American sharpshooter and folk heroine who starred in Buffalo Bill's Wild West. She was known as Little Sure Shot. Oakley developed hunting skills as a child in order to provide for her impoverished family in western Ohio. Both lucky and extremely talented, Annie Oakley used her astonishing marksmanship to escape a poor childhood and became the first female superstar in what had been a male-dominated profession. She was 6 of 7 children. Her father died of pneumonia. Her mother, unable to support her children, sent Annie to live at the Darke County Infirmary, the county poorhouse, when she was 9 years old. At age 10, she became a servant, helping with a baby and household chores for a local farming family. The family was abusive. However, Annie referred to them later only as the wolves. She stayed with them in near slavery for about 2 years before running away back to the Darke County Infirmary, and she returned home to her mother not long after. As a young woman, she met Frank Butler while he performed his traveling marksman show in Cincinnati. Part of Frank's act was accepting challenges from local marksmen in matches with bets placed on both sides. A local hotel owner arranged a shooting match between Frank and Annie on Thanksgiving Day. Frank was surprised to learn that his opponent was a 5-foot-tall, 15-year-old girl who beat him after he missed his 25th shot. They began a courtship and married soon after. In 1886, the Lakota Sioux spiritual leader and medicine man Sitting Bull, who had been beaten Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn, saw a show that Annie gave that was in a theater in St. Paul, Minnesota. He asked to see her after the show. Annie gave him a signed picture of herself, and Sitting Bull gave her moccasins he had worn at Little Bighorn, and the nickname Watanya Cecilia, Little Sure Shot. Annie and Frank met William Buffalo Bill Cody while performing with the circus in New Orleans. Frank and Cody negotiated for a trial with the Buffalo Bill Wild West show in early 1885. Annie and Frank would go on to perform with the Buffalo Bill Wild West show for 16 seasons. Cody called Annie Little Miss, an apt nickname for the 5-foot-tall markswoman, and had her perform early in the show to help audiences get used to the sound of live gunfire. Her charisma and skill with many firearms endeared audiences to her and to the show. Audiences were astounded to see her shooting a cigar from her husband's hand or splitting a playing card on edge at 30 pieces.
Wow. On edge.
On edge. Little Sure Shot.
Definitely.
In 1887, Buffalo Bill's Wild West show traveled to London in England as part of the American exhibition, which coincided with Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, where they gave several special performances for the royal family. During the performance for Queen Victoria, the Queen rose and bowed when the American flag came into the arena. It was the first time a British monarch had saluted the American flag. After a bad rail accident in 1901, she retired from the Wild West show, but she began touring in a play about her career. She also instructed women in marksmanship, believing strongly in women's self-defense. Part of Oakley's lasting legacy is the Irving Berlin's musical Annie, Get Your Gun, based on her life story, with the initial run starring Ethel Merman and later Reba McEntire and Bernadette Peters. Yes. That was the version I saw. From the very beginning of her life, Annie Oakley challenged stereotypes about what it means to be a woman. She would go on to become one of America's most famous sharpshooters while championing equal rights. By the time of her death in 1926, Americans were celebrating the liberated, urban-focused, modern times of the Jazz Age. Women had won the right to vote, wore less restricted clothing, and followed a changing ideal that was loosening some of the restriction on women's roles and behavior that had reigned throughout the 19th century. She wouldn't have said she was a feminist, but there's a difference between being avowed and actually doing it, states Glenda Wright, professor of history at Ball State University in Muncie. Oakley campaigned for equal pay for women. She also taught women how to shoot and had a partnership marriage with her husband, Frank Butler, who gave up his career in show business to become her manager. And her famous quote, "I ain't afraid to love a man, I ain't afraid to shoot a man." It captures the essence of her bold and unapologetic spirit. Thank you.
Howdy, y'all.
Howdy.
I'm Marty Muldoon. I'm going to share some facts about Calamity Jane. What I have in common with Calamity Jane is her actual name was Martha Jane, and my actual name is Martha Jean. So and like Annie Oakley, she also became a famous performer. But Calamity Jane, born Martha Jane Canary, was born in Missouri on May 1st, 1852. After moving by wagon train with her family to Utah, both of her parents died, leaving Jane in charge of her 5 younger siblings. So, at 14, she loaded them back up into the wagon and moved on north to Wyoming. She worked at whatever jobs she could get, including dishwasher, cook, waitress, dance hall girl, nurse, and ox team driver. She claims she was signed on as a U.S. Scout, but others have claimed that her occupations were a little less family-friendly. You get my drift. She may have acquired the nickname of Calamity Jane as a result of her warnings to men that to offend her was to court calamity. It is certain, however, that she was known by that nickname by the time she arrived in Deadwood, South Dakota, with Wild Bill Hickok in 1876. Jane claims to have married Wild Bill, and there was some possible evidence that was true, but it's pretty sure that he was the father of her daughter. After Wild Bill's murder, Calamity Jane the legend has it that she went after his murderer with a cleaver because she had left her guns at home that day. Later in her life, she also appeared in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, and also in the 1901 Pan American Exposition, as a sharpshooter and a storyteller. She is said, besides being known for being a sharpshooter and for dressing in men's clothes and being a little rough and tumble, she was also known to be very compassionate to others, especially the sick and the needy. This facet of her character contrasted with her daredevil ways and helped to make her a celebrity on the frontier. Calamity Jane died in 1903 from illness brought about by too much alcohol. Her life inspired the song I'm going to sing to you called The Ballad of Calamity Jane. And I cannot credit who wrote it because it's only credited as The Ballad of Calamity Jane by Calamity Jane. The oldest of 6, when her daddy died, she moved them out west, where she did her best. Washing dishes, cooking and dancing, but her wilder side no one could tame, so they gave her the name Calamity Jane. No stranger to the bottle or afraid of a fight. They say she went upriver and swam 90 miles. On to South Dakota, she never felt so alive. They said, Calamity Jane has arrived. She would drink and she would dance. They say she dressed up like a man. She always ended up on the go child. She went after his killer the day that he died. When she's out on a limb, there's no changing her mind. She would drink and she would dance, they say she dressed up like a man. She always ended up on the good, but I heard she had a heart of gold. They say that the whiskey finally brought her down, but I hear that her name is still whispered in town. She was a woman before her time, but we tell her story round the fire by night. We may meet her again in another life. She would dance and she would drink, they say she dressed up like a man. She always ended up on the go, but I heard she had a heart of gold. That's the legend of Calamity Jane.
Hello, folks. I'm going to talk about Doc Susie, not a well-known trailblazer in the West. And I'm going to speak in first person, so imagine that I am even smaller than I am, that I'm a very diminutive, skinny woman who just could trek 6 miles if she needed to get her patient fixed up. And a lot of what I'm going to tell you came from this book, Doc Susie, The True Story of a Country Physician in the Colorado Rockies. Trailblazers, they call us. Well, I've walked many a trail in my goings round. Never had use for a horse or carriage. Well, if they need me far enough away, they'll send a Moffat to get me. I hop the Moffats between here and there. I'll put on my old snowshoes, slog up that mountain if a body needs a fix. Perhaps I should start at the beginning. I was born in good old Indiana in 1870. Fort Wayne, particularly. Boy, do I miss the green fields and gentle breezes of Indiana. Well, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a telegraph operator. I learned Morse code. Imagined myself tapping away for those important messages. But my dad, he was all about education for both me and my brother. Sent me up to medical school. Took me 2 years of applying because they wouldn't hear of any women becoming a doctor back then. But I found myself at the University of Michigan in the 90s. That's the 1890s. Wasn't easy, but I did well. Did my doctor's studies, got my doctor's degree in 97. Thought I could show up in Denver, big city, take the doctoring, but folks there had their doctors already. They were all men. I got pretty discouraged. Couldn't make enough money to eat. So I moved into Cripple Creek, Colorado, back in with my pa and my brother. But my brother, he got himself sick and they wouldn't tell me until it was too late. He up and died. It was time for me to get out. So I headed to the town of Greeley, Colorado. Up in Greeley, it didn't take much to a one doctor either. So I took to being a nurse just to get myself fed and get myself housed. And the consumption was taking about as many folks as 1 in 2 that got it. Studies showed patients need fresh air and cleanliness. So we would strip the bedding, we'd wash everything in boiling water, we'd pull them out during the day and put them back in at night. Well, it was a lot to do being a small woman, and I had the bad luck to catch it myself. So I was skinny as a pole bean, very weak, and the saying was, get out in the clean mountain air. So I went up even higher, took those Moffat trains up over the pass, and we climbed up on a steam locomotive, crossing our fingers that an avalanche wouldn't come down on us. Took a 3-hour zigzag course going up that pass and down that pass, and I ended up in the small town of Fraser. Well, I got myself a job in the afternoons working at a local store. Didn't tell anyone I was a doctor. I know how that goes. But one day a young cowboy, because word had gotten around, a young cowboy came up and he said, I need help, my friend Dave, he's in a bad way. Dave got himself cut up in some barbed wire. Well, what am I going to do? Hippocratic oath says you must help, so I grabbed my bag, followed him down to the corral. And I said, "Is Dave your partner?" And he said, "No, man, he's my horse." That's all I got. Well, like any other patient, I got him boiling water. I stitched up the muscles and the sinews. I rinsed the wounds in carbolic acid. And the locals were watching. Everybody had to gather around and see what this woman was doing with this horse. Well, they couldn't believe how much attention I was spending to making sure my instruments were sterile, and the cleanliness of all the ways I was rubbing the wounds and changing the rags. Took a little breakthrough in people's minds. That horse was an advertisement for me every time he walked into town. So it didn't take long before I was being woken up by frantic knocking to get me out to a rancher's house. Their eldest son had developed pneumonia, and many times an otherwise healthy person those days could die from their lungs being filled up with fluid. These families depended on the labor of all their children, especially the eldest son. Well, they thought I was a little crazy, but they followed my directions. Get him out of bed, stoke the fire up, make the house as hot as you can, but open up all the doors, boil pot after pot of water, and pour it in the bath that we put him in, and we pulled that boy through that night. Well, after that, I'd get called up to the lumberjack camps, set fractures, pull people through, bouts of pneumonia, and then had to tramp through the mountain one night because a woman was having a difficult birth, and we got her through that. Many years later, my reputation for curing pneumonia helped me go to houses every day and night during the flu pandemic of 1918. But back in the day where I was talking about, I carried a cowbell and a revolver when I went on night calls because there was mountain lions. The ranchers in those mountains might have got snowed in by storms, but doctors make it through somehow. I put on those snowshoes, 20 below, get on my scarf, get on my boots, and my sheep's wool coat. And the whole time I dream about retiring to Indiana. Well, eventually it worked out. Those grateful ranchers and lumberjacks even built me a nice house on land that I was granted. The treacherous train rides over the pass were ended by the completion of the Moffat Tunnel at the cost of many lives that you don't always hear about. There was a need for a county coroner, and after some thought I took the job because I found it my task, my duty to give those miners' families respect and closure on the loss of their husbands or their sons. And through the dangers of the snowy mountains and the even more dangerous tunnel work, I was lucky enough to stay whole and healthy my whole life. But I never returned to those green valleys of Indiana. In my last days, the good nurses and doctors at Colorado General Hospital put me up and cared for me. I don't know if all that makes me a trailblazer. I'm just happy to be remembered as a good doctor. Thank you.
I am Ella Knowles Haskell for a while. I was born in New Hampshire in 1860 with a strong desire to become a lawyer. Even then, I was homeschooled by my mother until her passing when I was just 15. After which, I attended a normal school, a school for teacher training. Following 2 years of study, I spent 4 years teaching in a country school. Driven to further my education, I enrolled at Bates, a co-ed college in Maine. During my time there, I joined the debate team. I focused my studies on oratory and composition, earning my degree in 1880. Due to developing lung problems and early signs of tuberculosis, A doctor recommended I move to a drier climate. This led me to teach in Iowa and Salt Lake City, and eventually arriving in Helena, Montana. I taught 4 years and eventually became principal of the school. But the law was still calling. During this time, I started working for a lawyer. While working for him, I became the first notary public. I was doing a lot of lobbying of the state legislature to have them amend the statute and let me take the bar. In 1889, the year Montana became a state, I was allowed to take the bar with a score. Are you ready? That was higher than any man would ever take. After passing the bar, I went to work in John Kinley's office. Finding clients was a bit of a challenge. Finally, one merchant hired me to retrieve 3 umbrellas that he had loaned and had not been returned. To his amazement, I did just that, and he refused to pay me. A discussion was held in the store in front of the customers, and they told him to pay me. 2 quarters. And I kept those 2 quarters the rest of my life. Another client was a Chinese man who worked for a black man, and he filed a lawsuit against him. He had not been paid his $5 wages. I proved that he had not been paid and made sure he got his back wages. After about a year, I moved into my own offices. Most of my clients were men. In 1892, I decided to run for Attorney General. I campaigned 3,000 miles all over the entire state. I got beaten by a lawyer named Haskell. I got over 11,000 votes. And you know, they were all men. They were the only ones allowed to vote. Apparently on my campaign trail, I impressed a few. He appointed me Assistant Attorney General, and eventually, would you believe it? He married me. In 1895, a lot of my clients came from people I met on the campaign trail. There were a fair amount of divorce cases in our practice. In 1902, Henry and I moved to Glendive, his hometown. Our marriage did not survive. After several years back in Helena, I ended up in Butte, doing mining law. The War of the Copper Kings was going on. On one particular case, I got a $10,000 fee. I even had owned some mining rights. During this time, I also appeared before the U.S. Supreme Court, and I worked with the Department of the Interior and got a $200,000 grant for them to build schools in Great Falls. I also was working very hard on women's suffrage. As it turns out, Montana was 20 years earlier than the U.S. in giving women their right to vote. As a person who grew up in Butte, Montana myself, I think the chances are very good that my real grandfather knew Ella. My grandfather was an integral part of the War of Copper case. They had to put him in hiding. Also, my great-grandmother, the chances are good, was a friend of, met Calamity Jane. My great-grandmother owned a hotel in Virginia City, Montana, where Calamity Jane was for a time. And in passing the hat, I would like to introduce to you someone my real father knew in real life, Jeanette Rankin, who has some wonderful points of distinction.
Those of us from Montana, and she passed me the hat, so I will now put it on. There we go. Now I stand before you not as an ornament to history, nor as a curiosity, but as a citizen of the United States, elected by the people of Montana to do a job. When I first took the oath of office in 1917, they said it was symbolic. The first woman in Congress. Oh, imagine that. Reporters crowded the steps. Some cheered, some laughed, many doubted. But I did not come to Washington to be admired. I came to vote. I was born on the wide plains of Montana Territory, where the wind teaches you endurance and the land teaches you honesty. Out there, a person's worth is measured by their work, not by their gender. I carried that lesson with me into the suffrage movement. I traveled dusty roads and spoke in schoolhouses and town halls, arguing that women deserve the ballot, not because we were better than men, but because democracy devotes the voice from all its people. When Montana women won the right to vote in 1914, I knew the door had opened. 2 years later, the voters, men and women, sent me to Congress. Almost immediately, the test came. War in Europe. The drums were beating. President Wilson asked for a declaration of war against Germany. I listened. I prayed. I weighed my duty to my country. Still do. But I could not convince my conscience that sending young men to die across an ocean would make this world safer for democracy. So I voted no. The chamber fell silent. When my name was called, I said, I want to stand by my country, but I cannot vote for war. They called me naive, disloyal, emotional. They just said a woman had no business deciding matters of war. But I had been sent there to decide, and I did. Years passed. The 19th Amendment was ratified. Women across the nation finally gained the right for which we had struggled for so long. I felt pride, yes, but also urgency. To vote is not a gift. It is a responsibility. Then in 1941, I returned to Congress. The world was again at war, and then came Pearl Harbor. Smoke rising from the Pacific, grief and fury sweeping the nation. Once more the roll was called for a declaration of war, this time against Japan. I knew what my vote would mean. I knew I would stand alone, and I did. The only vote against the war. Crowds gathered outside, angry voices, threats. I was rushed from the Capitol for my safety, but I had not changed. My belief had not changed. I opposed the war in 1917. I must oppose it in 1941. Consistency is not stubbornness, it is integrity. Do I regret it? No. I regret the necessity of war. I regret that the world often chooses violence over understanding, but I do not regret voting for my conscience. I was 87 in 1968. I led thousands of women against the Vietnam War in what became known as the Jeanette Rankin Brigade. History may judge me kindly or harshly. That is not mine to decide. What was mine, and is always ours, is the choice to act with courage when courage is costly. I was the first woman in Congress. I passed on in 1973 at the age of 92. I hope I'm remembered not for being first, but for standing firm. And now I turn it over to Will Rogers.
Oh, howdy, folks. My name most days is William Ryder Leach, but for a few minutes this afternoon it is William Penn Adair Rogers. You knew me best as Will Rogers, America's favorite cowboy. Cowboy philosopher. Did you also know I was a vaudeville performer, a humorist, a social commentator, and humanitarian? Or that I was a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, born in Oklahoma and called Oklahoma's favorite son. Yep. And I acted in over 70 movies, lots of them before the talkies. Got famous early in life for my rope twirling skills. And I guess I got kind of rusty with the rope in my old age. Why am I a trailblazer today? I think it was radio that did that. Before radio, all entertainment was local. You went to the movies, silent movies then, or in the city there were vaudeville shows, or the circus came to town. But everybody connected to radio. It was radio that made me known to most of America, and it's probably radio that got me here this afternoon as a trailblazer. Well, how did it all happen? Well, the Cherokee thing, Mother was born part Cherokee, and her people had got run out of Georgia in 1830 in that Indian Removal Act that was called the Trail of Tears. Well, I'm sure happy we ain't forcibly removing people anymore. I didn't much like school, but I was good with horses and with the lariat. So I worked as a gaucho in Argentina and on a ranch in South Africa. And it was there that I started show business as a trick roper in Texas Jack's Wild West Circus in Africa. I took that rope and pony act to Australia, then came back for the St. Louis World's Fair, and that got me a job in Madison Square Garden in New York, which got me into the Ziegfeld Follies, vaudeville. Man, at one point I was making $140 a week. But that had to also support my pony and the guy that took care of it. Gradually, my act was less horse and more humor, especially picking on government and politicians. Then movies came along. Now, early silent films were often made in the New York area, not in Hollywood, and the vaudeville connection with Ziegfeld got me connected with Samuel Goldwyn, who got me some parts in starting 1918 and got noticed by Hollywood. So I moved west. And I did 48 silent films all told. 48 of them. And the talkies came in, and that was good for me because I sure like to talk, and people like my wit. I also did a radio daily newspaper column. I did a daily newspaper column for a while, then a weekly column, and radio starting in 1929. And that's probably how most people got to know me. It was a 30-minute show, but I sort of ramble, and I sometimes got caught off in the middle of a sentence. And so I took to bringing a wind-up alarm clock to warn me to wrap it up, and its on-air buzz became part of my show. So you asked about my personal life. I married Betty Blake in '08, and we had 3 children. Will Rogers Jr., Mary, James, Fred. Well, Fred died young, but the others did well for themselves. Betty and I bought 20 acres near Claremore, Oklahoma. Ooh, $50 an acre he charged me for that. My gosh. After I died, 1935, plane crash, they made the ranch into a really nice memorial. Oh, did I mention that I ran for president in 1928? It was a mock campaign. That means it wasn't real. And it gave me license to poke more fun at the government and politicians. On election day, I declared victory and promptly resigned. Some years later, they placed a statue of me in Statuary Hall in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And they faced it, not like the other statues, but looking directly at the entrance to the House chamber, so I could keep an eye on Congress. Remember to keep doing that. Well, what were some of that political satire and folksy wisdom that I wrote up in the papers? Let's see here. I never met a man I didn't like. If you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. I don't make jokes, I just watch the government and report the facts. I don't belong to any organized political group, I'm a Democrat. We always want the best man to win an election. Unfortunately, he never runs. Everything is changing. People were taking their comedians seriously and the politicians as a joke. It used to be the other way around. A politician is just like a pickpocket. It's almost impossible to get one to reform. The stranger is just a friend I haven't met yet. No man is great if he thinks he is. If you're riding ahead of the herd, take a look back every now and then. And finally, never miss a good chance to shut up, so I think that's what I'll do. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Before I get into my character, I just want to thank the beautiful opportunity to stand with these beautiful actors and readers. I was presented this opportunity by Paul just as a tag-along, so I'm glad that I could represent the Native American perspective of these beautiful trailblazers. I'm going to tell you a little bit about an ancestor of mine. She's not a direct descendant of my family, but from where I'm from, back in South Dakota and North Dakota area, where she's from, we're all kind of related. We're all related in general in Native American terms, and so I'm just very honored that I get to share the history of Redbird. So let me dive in today. I stand here before you today, not only as a presenter, but as a Dakota tribal member, sharing the story of a woman whose courage echoes in our people today. A woman whose voice refused to be silenced. A woman who carried 2 worlds inside of her and used both to fight for justice. This ancestor of mine is named Zikalasa, or Redbird in Lakota language. Later, her name was changed to Gertrude Simmons Bonnin, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's go back in time, shall we? Zikalasa was born in 1876 in the Yankton Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. Kind of my neighborhood. Her mother was Reaches for the Wind, or Ellen Simmons, of the Yankton Dakota tribe. Her father was white, and unfortunately left when Redbird was very young. Zikalasa was raised with her mother among her people, surrounded by the Dakota language, her stories, ceremonies, and community. As a child, Redbird loved the land. She described running across the prairie, feeling the wind, listening to the elders tell their stories. Those early years really shaped her identity. She knew who she was because she knew where her people came from. But at the age of 8, her life changed dramatically. Missionaries came to the reservation, recruiting children to go to boarding schools in the East. These schools promised education and opportunity. They told parents that their children would learn English and gain skills to succeed in white society. Despite her mother's fear, Redbird decided she wanted to go. She traveled far from home, all the way to Indiana, where she attended White's Manual Labor Institute, a Quaker boarding school. There, from everything that she learned and everything that was a part of her life was stripped away. Zikalasa was forbidden to speak her language. She was punished for practicing her culture. She was taught that her own people were uncivilized. Her long hair, a symbol of her strength and culture and identity to the Dakota people, was forcibly cut. Later, she wrote about hiding under the table to avoid it. She was dragged out and held down. For her, this felt like death of who she was prior to who she was becoming. Imagine being 8 years old, being told that your entire identity was wrong. Even your own name was changed to fit into your new way of life. Why, she's now Gertrude. Instead of breaking her silence, though, this experience awakened something powerful in her, a determination to speak the truth. Gertrude excelled academically. She became one of the accomplished violinists and even taught music. She studied at Earlham College in Indiana, rare for Native American women in the late 1800s. Yet she constantly felt caught between two worlds, too Indian for white society and too assimilated for when she returned home. Rather than choose one, she utilized both. In the early 1900s, she began writing. Her essays and short stories were published in the national magazines like Atlantic Monthly. Her most accomplished works were The School Days of an Indian Girl, an autobiography-style writing which she exposed the emotional trauma and cultural violence of boarding schools. She was one of the first Indigenous writers to tell the story directly to the white American audience. She did it in their English language, and she did it with eloquence, intelligence, and unflinching honesty. She did not stop at writing, though. She became a political advocate as well. Redbird married Raymond Bonnin, and together they worked for Native American rights. Eventually, she moved to Washington, D.C., where she became a leader in national Indigenous advocacy. In 1926, she co-founded the National Council of American Indians, one of the first organizations dedicated to securing full citizenship rights for Native people. It's important for a lot of you to remember that in the early 1900s, Native American people were not recognized as U.S. citizens. That meant that no guaranteeing of voting rights and no legal protections for their rights as well. Redbird fought fiercely to change these for her people. Her advocacy helped build momentum for the Indian Citizen Act of 1924, which granted U.S. citizens to all Native Americans born in the United States. But even after 1924, a lot of states still blocked Native American people from voting, so she continued to fight. She also supported women's suffrages, understanding that Native people and Native women not only faced racial and gender discrimination, she believed political power was essential for protecting tribal sovereignty, land, and culture. She was also a musician and composer. In 1913, she co-wrote the Sundance Opera, one of the first operas written by a Native American. It incorporated Dakota themes and music at the time when Native American ceremonies were outlawed by the U.S. government. Through art, she preserved culture that the federal policy was trying to erase. Writer, musician, organizer, and political strategist, she lived at a time when Indigenous ceremonies were banned, children were taken to boarding schools, and Native voices were dismissed by the government. Yet she stood in front of lawmakers and demanded change. She passed away in 1938, but her impact continues. Through her voice in essays, speeches, music, and activism, she made sure the world heard her people. She reminds us identity is not something to surrender, but it's something to defend. When I speak her name, I'm reminded that our story survived. I share her story today, not only in remembrance, but in continuation. Today we talk about Indigenous rights and Indigenous cultures, Native literature, and representation, but we are walking the trail that she once helped blaze. My present day career today would not exist without the stepping stones that Redbird grounded many years before. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Tina Jones-Williams, and I chose to sit in the audience so that I had a chance to see the other performers. I'm not a part of this group. Like the other Tina, I'm a tag-along. And Paul invited me to present the life of Betty Reid Soskin because I know her. We both have roots to South Berkeley, and we both are authors, but her experiences far exceed mine. Betty Reid Soskin lived in 11 decades. Through the Great Depression, World War II, the Civil Rights era, the Vietnam War. She was born in 1921 and left this life in 2025 at the age of 104. That in itself is remarkable, but more remarkable is the full, nuanced, layered, and multifaceted life she led in response to the time in which she lived. Until her retirement at the age of 100, she had been the oldest working park ranger, an activist, author, singer, business owner, wife, and mother. I met her first in her role as business owner. A little more on that later. Betty Reid Soskin was born in Detroit to a Cajun mother and Creole father, both with French and African roots. Shortly after her birth, the family moved from Detroit to New Orleans, known for its vibrant Creole Cajun culture and community. The family thrived there in their new environment. But in 1927, when Betty was only 6 years old, a hurricane and flood destroyed her family home and business. And as a result, they made their final move to Oakland, California, where Betty graduated from Castlemont High School just as World War II began. Anxious to be of service, Betty began working in support of the war effort as a file clerk for the U.S. Air Force, where she worked until she discovered her employer had hired her under the assumption that she was white. They parted ways. Her next job was in a segregated unit of the Boilermakers Union, where she witnessed firsthand the treatment of black workers, at which point Betty's lived experiences began to shape the foundation of her work as an activist for equity and fair play. In 1943, she met Mel Reid. After the war ended in 1945, he and Betty opened Reid's Records on Sacramento Street in South Berkeley, known as the heart of the only area in Berkeley where people of color were allowed to live. Sacramento Street, a main thoroughfare, was home to businesses owned and operated by black people. Among them, Reid's Records became a pillar of the black community from the time it opened. Reid's remained in business, listen, from 1945 until 2019, almost 75 years. It is at Reid's Records where my family and I met Betty Reid for the first time. My family moved to South Berkeley in 1943, 10 years before I was born. And I am sure that my mother, a consummate music lover, mostly jazz, was a frequent Reid's Record patron and visitor from the moment they opened their doors. When we were old enough, my siblings and I, along with the other kids from the neighborhood, bought 45s. Does anybody know what 45s are? At Reid's, and Betty was there to greet us. Mel and Betty Reid were also music promoters and were responsible for bringing a variety of popular performers to the Bay Area in the 1950s and 1960s. In 1972, Reid's marriage ended. Also, her former husband's health declined, and Betty took over the business and became the face of Reid's Records, becoming prominent in civic and community matters in the Bay Area. Her primary focus was the civil rights movement. In addition, she held roles as staff to a Berkeley City Council member and as field representative for 2 California State Assembly members. In 1978, Betty remarried. She married Dr. William Soskin, a professor at UC Berkeley, and continued to be active in pursuit of justice and fair play, lending her voice in song and protest. Later, she took a step back and allowed her children to take the reins at Reid's Records. In 1995, she was named Woman of the Year by the California State Legislature for her advocacy and community empowerment work. In 2005, she was honored by the National Women's History Project as one of the nation's 10 outstanding women builders of communities and dreams. In 2007 is when she took the job as a park ranger at the Rosie the Riveter Center in Richmond, California, where she made presentations and led tours of the wartime facilities. And that's where I and my sister became reacquainted with her. We actually walked up to her for the presentation, and before we could speak, she said, "I know who you are." She had not seen us since we were children, but I think that she remembered my face as my mother's face. You know what I mean? So anyway, so that's where our paths crossed again. Betty was a talented storyteller and was able to augment the prepared material with first-hand experiences and anecdotes as she had worked at the Richmond shipyards during the war. In 2015, during the Obama presidency, she received the President's Coin for her exceptional service, dedication, and for sharing her often untold stories of World War II home front. That coin was later stolen from her. However, she thwarted being reached. It was in a home invasion. And she was able to get that person out of her home by burning him with a hot iron. So these women, though she didn't have a gun or a lariat or a, she used what she had. At the same time, she was invited to light the national Christmas tree just south of the White House and was deemed a national treasure. In 2016, she received the Civil Medallion Award from the World War II Museum in New Orleans, only one of 2 women recipients alongside Elizabeth Dole. And also in 2016, she was awarded Sierra Club's Trailblazer Award for her lifetime of service and advocacy. In 2018, she published her book, Sign My Name to Freedom. Our paths crossed again at Offrey event. I had the opportunity to be one of the authors featured with her as we made presentation. In 2019, she featured in the Rosie the Riveter Trust documentary, No Time to Waste, the urgent mission of Betty Reid Soskin, which highlights her work and influence within the national park system. On September 22nd, 2021, on her 100th birthday, and Elsa Branty Middle School was officially renamed Betty Reid Soskin Middle School. On March 31st, 2022, at the age of 100, Betty Reid Soskin retired from the Park Service. On December 21st, 2025, Betty Reid Soskin left this life at the age of 104. On March 1st, 2026, in a full circle moment at the Henry J. Kaiser Center, many years and many accolades after starting her career at the Richmond shipyards, also a Kaiser legacy, 1,000 people gathered to pay homage and last respects to Betty Reid Soskin. May her legacy endure and may she be well remembered. Thank you.
For our curtain call, each one of us will read a quote from a trailblazer in history. I will start with Mark Twain. Suppose you were an idiot, and suppose you were a member of Congress, but I repeat myself.
I may be compelled to face danger, but never fear it. And while our soldiers can stand and fight, I can stand and feed and nurse them. Clara Bach, Judy.
I'd rather regret the things I have done than the things I haven't.
Love yourself first, and everything else falls in line. Lucille Ball.
If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. You don't make progress by standing on the sidelines. Shirley Chisholm.
The greatest danger to our future is apathy. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Dr. Jane Goodall.
When I'm asked, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? I say, when there are 9. Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
A woman is like a tea bag. You never know how strong she is until she gets in hot water.
Live in such a way that you would not be ashamed to sell your parrot to the town gossip.
We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it for our children. Take only what you need and leave the land as you found it.
What gets remembered is a function of who's in the room doing the remembering. Betty Reid Soskin.
Thank you, everyone.